She moved through the heavy glass door of the physical therapy clinic with the slow, deliberate gait of someone who had learned to be invisible. Her name was Maya, and at 42 years old, she was accustomed to the way the world looked at her. The faded scar that ran from her right temple down to her jawline, a memento from a training accident 15 years ago involving a malfunctioning fast rope rigging, pulled at the corner of her mouth, giving her a permanent, slight grimace. Her left leg, reconstructed after the same fall, dragged just a fraction of a second behind the right. To the casual observer, she was a victim of circumstance, a woman beaten down by life, a patient, not a practitioner. The clinic was bright and smelled of antiseptic and mint. She wore no uniform, just simple gray sweatpants and a loose U.S. Navy hoodie. The letters faded and cracked. She checked in at the front desk, her voice a low murmur. The receptionist, a bubbly girl named Chloe, handed her a tablet to fill out the standard intake forms. Maya sat in the waiting area, her eyes scanning the room with a quiet intensity that no one noticed. She cataloged the exits, the weight distribution of the people around her, the nervous energy of the young athletes, the weary slump of the elderly. Across from her, 3 young men were sprawled across a couch, their legs spread wide, taking up as much space as possible. They were loud, their laughter sharp and condescending. They were SEALs, or at least they were in the training pipeline. Maya could tell from the cocky set of their shoulders, the high and tight haircuts they still sported, or in the way they spoke about their PT scores, as if they were the currency of the universe. Their names were Bowers, Reed, and Kovac. They were in their early 20s, all muscle and ego, waiting for their own appointments for minor sports injuries, a tweaked knee, a sore shoulder from too many pull-ups. Bowers nudged Reed and nodded toward Maya. "Check out the grandma over there," he whispered, not quietly enough. "Looks like she went a few rounds with a truck and lost." Reed snickered. "Probably fell down the stairs at the retirement home. What's she even doing here? This is a performance clinic, not a hospice." Kovac, the largest of the 3, leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Maya's scar. "Hey, sweetheart," he called out, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Tough break. Did your cat scratch you?" Maya didn't look up from the tablet. Her thumb continued to scroll through the medical history questions, but a muscle in her jaw, the one not affected by the scar, tightened almost imperceptibly. She had heard worse. She had heard it all. Words were wind. They couldn't break bone, couldn't sever an artery. She was here for a reason. Their taunts escalated, fueled by her silence and their own beer-soaked bravado from the night before. Bowers stood up, stretching in a way that was meant to display his physique. He walked over and grabbed a magazine from the table next to her, his movement deliberately invasive. "You lost, ma'am? The arthritis clinic is 2 blocks over." Maya finally looked up. Her eyes, a deep, calm brown, met his. There was no fear in them, no anger. There was only a profound, unsettling patience. It was the look of a predator sizing up prey that had wandered too close. Bowers felt a flicker of something cold run down his spine, but he ignored it, puffing out his chest. "Sir," Maya said, her voice flat and even, "I would advise you to sit down." The use of "sir" from a woman who looked like a victim was the spark they needed. Reed and Kovac burst into laughter, slapping their knees. "Oh, man, she's giving you orders, Bowers. You gonna let her put you on report?" Reed howled. Emboldened, Bowers made a fatal error. As Maya stood up, ready to head to her appointment, he reached out and grabbed her upper arm. It wasn't a hard grab, just a possessive, taunting squeeze. "Hey, I'm talking to you," he said, his voice dropping to a mock, serious tone. "When a superior warrior is speaking, you listen." In that single second, the entire energy of the room shifted. Maya's body, which had seemed so frail and broken, became a coiled spring. Her free hand shot up and locked onto Bowers' wrist. It wasn't a woman's grip. It was a vise of compressed bone and sinew. With a minute twist, she applied pressure to the median nerve. Bauer's eyes went wide with shock and a sharp spike of pain as his hand involuntarily opened, releasing her arm. She didn't let go. She simply held him there, her face betraying no more emotion than a granite cliff. "You have just committed assault on a senior chief in the United States Navy," she said, her voice so low that only the three of them could hear. The words were precise, clipped, and carried the weight of absolute authority. The laughter died in their throats. Bowers tried to pull back, but it was like trying to free his hand from a steel trap. Reed and Kovac stood up, their postures changing from aggressive to confused. Just then, the door to the inner sanctum of the clinic swung open. A man in his 50s, lean and hard-looking with silver hair and a no-nonsense expression, stepped out. He was Captain Miller, the commander of the local Naval Special Warfare Development Group. He saw the scene and stopped dead. He didn't see three young studs and a broken woman. He saw three terrified trainees and the most formidable instructor he had ever known. "Senior Chief Thompson," Captain Miller said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. The three men felt their stomachs drop. Senior Chief? Thompson? The name was legendary in the training command. Maya, the Hammer. Thompson, the woman who had single-handedly rewritten the hand-to-hand combat curriculum. The woman who could outrun, outswim, and outfight almost every operator in the teams, even with one leg that didn't work right. She was the ghost story they told new guys to keep them humble. She was the one who failed candidates, who broke them down to nothing and rebuilt them into warriors. Maya released Bauer's wrist. He stumbled back, cradling his hand, his face a mask of white-hot terror. He looked at the small woman, then at his own useless bicep, and the reality of his stupidity crashed down on him. Captain Miller's eyes swept over the three young men, his disappointment a physical weight. "My office, now." He didn't wait for a response. He turned to Maya, his entire demeanor shifting to one of deep respect. "Senior Chief, my apologies for the interruption. Dr. Evans is waiting for you." Maya nodded, her face finally softening just a fraction. "Thank you, Captain." She didn't even glance at the three frozen men as she walked past them, her slight limp now appearing not as a weakness, but as a testament to a sacrifice made in the line of duty. They stared after her, their mouths agape, the echo of their own taunts ringing in their ears like a funeral bell. The first session with Dr. Evans was standard. He manipulated her knee, asked about pain levels, and discussed a new bracing strategy. But Maya's mind was only half in the room. The other half was replaying the scene in the waiting area. It wasn't the assault that bothered her. She could handle herself. It was the attitude, the arrogance, the complete lack of situational awareness. But if they had grabbed a stranger like that in a bar, they would have started a fight they couldn't finish. If they did it on deployment, in a foreign country, they could create an international incident or get themselves killed. As she left the exam room, she passed Captain Miller's office. The door was shut, but she could hear the muffled, high-pitched tones of the three men trying to explain themselves. She felt a flicker of pity for them, quickly extinguished. She had been in their shoes once, young and stupid, thinking physical prowess was the only thing that mattered. It had taken a bullet and a 30-foot fall to teach her otherwise. She waited in the corridor. A few minutes later, the door opened and the three men filed out, looking like they'd been through a debriefing from hell. Their faces were pale, their eyes downcast. Bowers looked like he was about to be sick. They saw her and froze, unsure of protocol. Should they salute? Should they apologize? Should they run? "At ease," Maya said, her voice softer than before. "Walk with me." They fell into step beside her, a bizarre procession down the sterile hallway. Maya didn't look at them. She just talked, her voice carrying the quiet authority of a lecture. "You think the teams are about being the biggest, the baddest, the loudest?" she began. You're wrong. That's what the movies tell you. In reality, it's about being the quietest. It's about observation. It's about knowing that the most dangerous person in the room is rarely the one with the most muscles. She stopped walking and turned to face them. Her eyes, no longer calm, were now blazing with a fire that made them each take a step back. "Oh, you grabbed me because I looked weak," she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "What if I was a foreign intelligence officer and that was a test? What if I was a mother protecting a child and I had a knife in my pocket? What if I was a terrorist and you just gave away your position and your intent with one stupid childish action?" She let the questions hang in the air. Reed swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Kovac stared at the floor, his massive frame seeming to shrink. "I'm not going to have you washed out," Maya said finally. "That's the easy way out for you. You'd learn nothing. You're assigned to my remediation clinic. 500 tomorrow morning. The beach. You will learn what a real PT session looks like. You will learn that the human body can be pushed far beyond the limits you think exist. And most importantly, you will learn to see. You will learn to read a room, to read a person, to assess a threat, not by the size of their biceps, but by the calm in their eyes and the stillness in their stance." She didn't wait for a reply. She turned and walked away, her limp now a rhythm they would come to know intimately over the coming weeks. The three men stood there, rooted to the spot, the first lesson already burned into their souls. Never, ever, judge a book by its cover, especially when that cover is worn, scarred, and belongs to a Navy SEAL senior chief. The next morning at 4:45, the beach was a cold, gray void. The Pacific Ocean crashed against the sand with a relentless, indifferent roar. Bowers, Reed, and Kovac stood shivering in their PT gear, their breath misting in the pre-dawn air. They hadn't slept, and their minds were a churning mess of fear, humiliation, and a strange, budding curiosity. At precisely 500, a figure emerged from the dunes. It was Maya. She wore black sweats and a windbreaker. She carried a stopwatch around her neck and a notepad in her hand. She moved with that same deceptive, uneven gait, but on the sand, it seemed to give her an advantage, a strange sort of stability. She stopped a few feet from them and looked them over. "Your run times are mediocre," she said without preamble. "Your swim times are passable. Your hand-to-hand is a joke." She pointed to the ocean. "The only thing that matters out there," she said, her voice rising above the sound of the waves, "is that it is bigger than you. It is colder than you. It is stronger than you. And it does not care about your feelings. Your job, and if you ever want to be operators, is to learn to be just like it." What followed was not a PT session. It was an exorcism. She didn't have them run. She had them crawl through the freezing sand. She didn't have them do push-ups. She had them hold the low crouch, muscles screaming, for minutes on end while she talked about the history of naval special warfare, about the men who had come before them, about the ones who had died. When they faltered, she didn't yell. She just stood there, her eyes holding them, and they found the strength to go on. She had them pair up and grapple in the sand, but it wasn't about winning. It was about feeling your opponent's weight, their tension, their intent. She showed them, using Bowers as a dummy, how she had disabled him with one small twist. She broke down the physics of it, the biology, the strategy. It was the most humbling and electrifying education of their lives. Days turned into weeks. The 0500 beach sessions became their new reality. They learned to see the tiny shifts in her posture that preceded a command. They learned to read the frustration in a teammate's eyes before it boiled over. They learned that her limp was not a weakness, but a constant reminder of the price of a mistake and a testament to the power of recovery. One morning, after a particularly brutal session of log PT where they had to carry a massive piece of driftwood up and down the beach in unison, they sat collapsed in the sand, gasping for air. Kovac, the biggest of the three, finally voiced what they were all thinking. Senior Chief, how? How do you do it? Your leg. How do you push past it? Maya sat down on the sand next to them, a simple, be human act that felt monumental. She looked out at the ocean for a long time. The rising sun was just beginning to paint the horizon in shades of orange and pink. It wasn't a training accident, she said quietly. Not really. It was an op, 9 years ago, a compound in the mountains. We were extracting a high-value target. My team was on the roof providing cover. The fast rope rigging was sabotaged. It wasn't a malfunction, it was an IED, crudely attached. It blew as I was descending. She touched the scar on her face. This was shrapnel. The leg was the fall, 30 feet onto solid rock. The 3 men were silent, their own exhaustion forgotten. They had heard stories of ops, of course, sanitized, heroic versions. This was different. This was raw and real. I lay there for 6 hours before the QRF could get to me, she continued, at her voice unwavering. I could hear my team still fighting above me. I could hear the tangos trying to find me in the dark. I couldn't move. I couldn't fight. All I could do was lie still and breathe. And in those 6 hours, I learned more about being a SEAL than in all my years of training. I learned that your greatest weapon isn't your arms or your legs. It's your mind. It's your ability to stay calm when the world is on fire. It's your ability to see the situation for what it is, not what you fear it to be. She finally turned to look at them. When I saw you 3 in that waiting room, you were blind. You were panicking over nothing. You saw a woman and you panicked. What are you going to do when you see a real threat? That was the turning point. After that morning, the sessions changed. They were still brutal. But they were no longer about punishment. They were about building. Maya taught them escape and evasion tactics, not just the techniques, but the mental game of it. How to blend in, how to control your breathing when your heart is hammering in your chest. She taught them close-quarters combat, but from a defensive perspective, how to de-escalate, how to use your voice and your presence to avoid a fight. She taught them that true strength was restraint. 6 weeks after that fateful day in the waiting room, their remediation period was over. Captain Miller had scheduled a final evaluation. It wasn't a written test or a standard physical fitness assessment. It was a simulation. They were dropped off in an unfamiliar part of the city, a rough neighborhood known for its high crime rate. And they were given a vague objective: make contact with a friendly asset in a specific bar and retrieve a package. They had no weapons, no backup, and no communication devices. They were told they were being watched, but they had no idea by whom. The bar was dark, smoky, and filled with hostility. The 3 men walked in, their senses on high alert. The old Bowers would have puffed out his chest and tried to dominate the room. The old Reed would have made a stupid joke. The old Kovacs would have glowered. But the men who walked in were different. They moved to a corner table, their backs to the wall, their eyes scanning, cataloging. They didn't stare at anyone, but they saw everyone. They noted the pool players, the couple arguing in the corner, the bartender with the nervous twitch. They saw the man in the baseball cap sitting alone, but nursing a beer, his knuckles scarred. They saw the threat. They waited. They didn't approach the asset whose description they had. They watched him. They saw him make eye contact with another man at the bar. They saw the almost imperceptible nod. They saw the trap being set. It wasn't a friendly asset. It was a lure. They were being set up for a beating, a test of their physical prowess. Instead of walking into the trap, they walked out. They slipped out a back door they had identified the second they walked in. They moved through the alleyways, using cover and concealment, just as she had taught them. They didn't fight. They evaded. They made their way back to the extraction point, a full 45 minutes before the time limit, having successfully identified the threat and removed themselves from it. Captain Miller and Maya were waiting for them, standing next to a nondescript van. The captain's face was unreadable. Maya's, for the first time, held the faintest ghost of a smile. "Report," Miller said. Bowers, the unofficial leader, stepped forward. He didn't talk about what they did. He talked about what they saw. He described the room, the players, the false asset, the man at the bar, the prearranged signal. He explained why they withdrew. Captain Miller looked at Maya. She gave a single, slow nod. Miller turned back to the three men. 6 weeks ago, I was ready to process your separation papers. I thought you were a liability, a danger to yourselves and anyone unlucky enough to serve with you. He paused. Senior Chief Thompson saw something else. She saw potential. She saw raw material that just needed to be refined. Today, you passed the most important test you will ever face. You proved you can think. You proved you can see. You're not operators yet. You have a long, hard road ahead of you. But you're no longer a lost cause. Dismissed. They didn't cheer. They didn't high-five. They just stood there, the weight of his words sinking in. They looked at Maya. She met their gaze, her own eyes conveying a world of meaning. Respect, finally earned. A challenge, still unmet. And a bond, forged in the freezing sand and the dark alleys, that would last a lifetime. As they turned to leave, Bowers hesitated. He walked back to Maya. He didn't salute. He just stood before her, a young man finally understanding the meaning of humility. "Senior Chief," he said, his voice thick, "thank you for not giving up on us." Maya looked at him. Her face softening into something almost maternal, yet still stern. "I didn't do it for you," she said, her voice quiet. "I did it for the men you'll lead one day, the ones who will need you to be smart, not just strong. Don't prove me wrong." He nodded, a single firm jerk of his head, and then jogged to join his teammates. Maya and Captain Miller watched them go. "You worked a miracle, Senior Chief," Miller said. Maya shook her head, her eyes on the three retreating figures, now just silhouettes against the city lights. "No, sir. I just showed them the ocean. They had to learn to swim in it themselves." She turned and walked toward the van, her limp a little more pronounced after the long day. But in her chest, there was a small, quiet warmth. The fire of arrogance had been extinguished in 3 young men. In its place, she had helped kindle something far more valuable, the quiet, steady flame of wisdom, and for a teacher, that was the only reward that mattered.